Martha Peet was born in an igloo in a community known as Talakuak, where only 4 other families lived. Martha grew up with her parents, who were closely tied to the land. She's a freelance interpreter, translator, and author of the Inuktitut pocketbook.
I would like to talk a little bit about how education came to be up in the Arctic, especially in my home community of Talaruaq in Nunavut, way up in the Arctic coast. I did not start attending school till I was 10 years old, because that's when the school was built, a one-room federal day school. And prior to that, my education, I'm not talking about education from my parents, what they taught me, all the laws of the Inuit, our traditional way of life teaching me. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about education settings. When Anglican minister's house was built in about 1956, maybe. The Anglican minister started inviting us to start attending school at his manse, and so us kids, maybe about 10 of us, there were not many people them days. Them days in the 50s, mid-50s, and that maybe there was about 5 to 8 families living in the community. So we used to go to Anglican minister's house to go to school, and it only consisted of the Anglican minister teaching us how to write in syllabics, Inuktitut syllabics. And so we learned how to write syllabics. Nothing in English was taught, because he was not a teacher, and none of us spoke one word of English. We all spoke in Inuktitut. And them days in Talaruaq especially, there were 2 dialects. One dialect was Natilik, which is who I am. I'm a Natilik person. Natilik dialect, which is the dialect of the Inuit who always lived in that area. And there was some more families that came by ship from Cape Dorset in the eastern Arctic. And these families traveled from Cape Dorset by ship in search of a Hudson's Bay post in central Arctic, central Nunavut. And they had picked Talaruaq as a place to build Hudson's Bay post. And so the Inuit that were in that ship had a different dialect. That was the Eastern Arctic dialect, which is spoken from front of the mouth. It's very soft, and it's For example, if I say, please feel welcome, in my dialect, I would say, Tungahugit. And if I say the same word in Eastern Arctic dialect, it would be pronounced Tungasugit. So one is very guttural, my dialect is very guttural, and the Eastern Arctic dialect is very soft and in front of the mouth, spoken from the front of the mouth. So in my community of Taluriaq, there were two dialects. Nowadays, like this year, everybody in the community uses both dialects. It's interchangeable now. But them days, there was in the community when I was younger, in the 50s on, it was very, the people from Cape Dorset spoke in their dialect, and Netsilik people who I am, we spoke in Netsilik Mute. So that's what's interesting about my home community of Taluriaq. But there were no differences. We all respected one another. So we learned from each other that way. So in 1960, federal government built a school, one-room school. And in that school, there were maybe 15 kids. And the ages ranged from 6 years old, which would be the start of kindergarten, right up to 18 years old. And we're all in the same grade. We're in kindergarten. And we all spoke Inuktitut. None of us spoke any English. And so we all started learning English at the same rate. And that was in 1960. And so I went to school for another 3 years. I don't remember what grade I was when I stopped school. I had to stop school because my dad passed away and I had to help my mother, who was a seamstress. My mother was a seamstress for the making skin clothing from animals for the RCMP and for the Hudson's Bay Company staff members. For example, in my home community of Taluriaq, there's RCMP, and there's also Hudson's Bay Company store. And quite often during the winter, maybe the RCMP will have to travel to a community about 40 miles away to what used to be called Pelly Bay, which is now Kugaruk. And maybe they have to make a dog team trip to Joe Haven. And they would go there by dog team. They would go visit these Joe Haven and Pelly Bay by dog team. So my mother was a seamstress in making clothing for the RCMP and for the Hudson's Bay Company. I had to leave school because she had no time to look after the kullik, the seal oil lamp. She had no time to be cutting up meat. She had no time to make oil using seal blubber. We would take seal blubber, which is thick, and we cut it into squares. And seal blubber is what's used to light the kullik. And so we would have to go outside, use a rock to pound the seal blubber. And as you pound away at the seal blubber, the oil is softening and it turns into liquid oil. And liquid oil is what we use to put in the kullik. Because if you put a whole seal blubber onto the kullik vessel part, it won't melt, it would just crust, and the oil doesn't seep out. So we had to pound it to turn it into oil, and then pour that oil into the kullik vessel part. And also seal blubber, if you put it in the kullik as a whole blubber, it creates smoke, it creates smell. So after pounding it with the rock, it turns into liquid oil. And that's what we use for the kullik. And of course, for the kullik seal oil lamp, we would use a wick. And what the wick is from collecting Arctic cotton flowers in summertime. Arctic cotton blooms usually in August, and that's when we would go picking out big bags. The bags are usually made from seal skin that's sewn together to make into a bag. And so my mom and I used to go out all day collecting Arctic cotton to use for kullik wick during the winter. And so we would pick lots. It takes picking all day to get a bag full of Arctic cotton. And often we run out of Arctic cotton in early spring, so we have no more wick that we had collected to use all winter. And then we would find a piece of cloth, because Hudson's Bay Company was around already and selling materials. Maybe we would rip off a piece of flannelette material that we can find, and we use that as a wick. But that cloth, compared to Arctic cotton, creates a lot of smoke. It smells, and it turns the inside of the igloo quite dark from the soot, because compared to Arctic cotton flowers, the material is smoky and doesn't burn clean like Arctic cotton flowers. So we always had chores to do. And of course we would, I remember my dad going to a dew line about maybe 30 miles away. He went there by dog team. He used to make these trips regular by dog team. And he would bring back from their dump, from the dew lines, a garbage dump, he picked up maybe some metal. He picked as much wood as he can from the dump, and he would take them home, and he would start carving things, maybe making maybe making a fish spear, a handle for man's knife. The women use ulus for cutting meat or skins or anything they want to cut. They use an ulu. It's a woman's knife. Whereas men have has a different kind of a knife. It's a long metal part like this. It's about so long, the metal part, and it has a wooden handle that goes like this, and it's really long. And why the metal part is so long is because when you're building an igloo, the snow is very deep, and when you're cutting up blocks to make an igloo, the knife has to go far down into the snow to cut out a block to make an igloo. So that knife in Inuktitut is called pana, which means a knife, man's knife, that is really long. And the women's knife has a handle on top and the metal bottom. That's called ulu. And so men have a knife, women also have their own knife. And even in today's education system, the children are not marked absent if they have to go out hunting with their father to help out their father out on the land, because that's part of education. So it's very, everything in education in Nunavut is beneficial to teaching the Inuit. They've been adapted, the curriculum's been adapted, so Inuit don't stop learning their traditional ways.
Hey.